everyone, welcome to 3.1 Intro to Data Analysis. We're going to be using Google Sheets, and we're going to get into just the basics of how to make your data look more readable, how to do a little bit of organizing and formatting, do some very basic formulas. Here we have a data set in a Google Sheet of child population data on race. This data comes from the U.S. Census Bureau and has dates from 2010 through 2019. When I first look at this, it looks like a mess. It's hard to even see straight. My eyes start going across, and it's a mess. So we just want to make this more readable for us. So as I start to focus more intently, I can see that the top row has some years in it. The left two columns have some like words, and so that is kind of some of our headings of this data. So one thing that might be nice is to make the headings stand out from the actual data in the table here in the sheet. So to highlight something, we're just going to click on and as we click, we're going to do in one motion, click and drag. You don't want to, unfortunately, click, then try to drag. Well, sometimes that works. No, so if you click, let go, and then drag, it's still working. Okay, so, but be careful. So here I have the top row of the data highlighted. I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm going to go ahead and make this data have a background. So this little paint can is filling the background. And even like a nice faint color like this light blue is a good choice. So that's going to make the background stand out. Maybe I actually want to make the titles bold. And maybe I want to center them. Right here, these lines are showing that everything's lined up on the left edge, but let's go and center them. All right, that's looking a little bit better. Okay, if I click away, I can see a little bit of difference when it's not highlighted. All right, I'm going to come over here, and if I'm looking at column A, I can see that actually this column, the words are being cut off because the column is not big enough for it. So if you put your cursor right between column A and B, you can see it turns into this arrow. And that means if you click and drag it, you can make it a little bit bigger. Well, you can keep doing that until you get the right place, or if you double click it, it'll expand all the way out here. Now, that data is now a really large column, and I would actually kind of prefer it to just not be quite as wide there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight this column of data, and Google has some funny symbols for it, but this symbol A here, if you hover over it, it says text wrapping. Right now it looks like a line going through the cell. That's because it's like the text would just keep going no matter what. I'm going to click it, and I'm going to click this one that says wrap. And now, nothing changed so far, but I can go ahead and shrink this column back down, and you can see now it's putting the data on a second line. So that looks a little bit nicer. But while I also have this, I'm going to go ahead and do some more formatting. I'm going to go ahead and give this a background. I'm going to stick with that same color. If you want to do something different, you could. I'm going to make it bold. Ooh, making it bold messed with my wrapping. You can see like it got too big. So maybe I'm going to unbold that. But I am going to go ahead and center the data. Now this column here, column B, is also some data, also some headings rather. And maybe I'm going to go ahead and even make that just a slightly lighter blue, and maybe I'm going to center that as well. All right, so now I've at least got that somewhat focused there. The data here is still a little bit messy. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to highlight it. I always think the data looks a little bit nicer when it is centered. So I'm going to put it in the center. I think that's a little bit better. I might actually shrink this down to 11 just to give it a little bit more room inside of the cells. Another thing that might help keep my eyes straight is to put on the borders. So if I click on the borders, there's all kinds of options. I'm just going to go ahead with this all borders. Great. But you know what? I'm still having trouble focusing. So if I look at this heading here, it's rows 2 and 3. Rows 2 and 3 are talking about all of this data here. So I'm going to take the data for these rows, and I'm going to go ahead and make them a background color of maybe a light green. All right, great. Now 4 and 5 go together. I'm going to leave them white, and then 5 and 6, I'm going to make them that light green again. And there it is. And I'm going to keep doing this. Every other 2 rows, Control Y will repeat the last thing you did. So if you want to do that as a shortcut, Control Y. And now I can see this data a little bit more neatly and organized. Terrific. I can now kind of look through what I actually have. So over here, if we look at some of the headings here, like this first one is children who are non-Hispanic, American Indian, and Alaskan Native alone, just those. So how many individual children were there? In 2010, there were 650,000, and in 2019, there were 615,000. So that number has decreased over that span of time. It's been roughly 1% of the population throughout that time. So we can kind of see some of this information here. If we look at non-Hispanic Asian alone, it started out at over 3 million, which was about 4%. And it's grown to 3,684,000, which is about 5%. If you're interested for a point of reference of how many children in total there were in the U.S. in this time period, that's the bottom column here. And you can see, of course, it says 100%. So all of these students, all of them, not students necessarily, children under 18, were 74 million in 2010. And down to 73 million, about 1 million children less at the end of the decade than at the beginning. Could just be a less kids being born in that range there. So now we can at least look at the data and see it a little bit more clearly. All right, now this data is very much how I like it, and I want to kind of mess with this data. I'm going to change it. I'm going to do some editing. I don't want to change the numbers and misrepresent groups, but I want to kind of move it around a little bit. Just to keep this one nice and pristine the way it is, I'm going to come down here to where it says Sheet 1. I'm going to right-click, 2-finger click, and I'm going to duplicate this spreadsheet. Ta-da! Now I have another one. And it looks exactly the same as the last one, but it's different. Okay, so I'm going to explain this in a moment, but I'm going to do a couple things. I need to kind of crack open some of these cells, and you see how this one cell is over 2 different rows? They have merged some cells. Well, we're actually going to, even though maybe merging might be the normal first thing to learn, we're going to unmerge those. So I highlighted them all. All of these are cells that have been merged. And if we go right here, one thing we can do is if we click that down arrow, we can go to unmerge. And now it just looks like there's a blank cell after each one of those headings. Why am I doing that? I want to delete these percentages because I'm not going to use them right now. So I'm going to click on this row. If I 2-finger click on it, I can delete the row. If you want, you can click a row with a percent, hold the Shift button, nope, not the Shift button, take it back. Click one row, hold the Control button, click the next one, click the next one, and I'm clicking every row that has that percent and really has a blank there in the race column. Click this one. And I'm actually going to get rid of these 2 rows down here at the bottom that have the totals. And I'm going to go ahead and now right-click and delete the selected rows. Well, that shortened up our table a lot. So I'm just going to click away to unselect things. All right, so now we have a number of different groups here. They're all separated. So let's go ahead and look at what would be a total for a specific column. So this is non-Hispanic 2 or more race groups. So they identify as more than one race. White alone, Hawaiian and other Pacific Islanders alone, Hispanic or Latino, Black but not Hispanic, Asian but not Hispanic, or any other group really. And then this is American Indian and Alaskan Natives. All right, so if we just went ahead and wanted to find out what's the total of all of these groups added together. Let's start talking about a Google Sheet formula. The first formula we're going to talk about is the sum formula. From math class, remember sum is the answer to an addition problem, and the sum formula adds the values of each cell from the first cell to the last cell. What do I mean first and last cell? So here's how the formula works. All formulas start with an equal sign. Now, for the sum formula, we just type sum, S-U-M, and then we type an open parenthesis. Now, what is this C6? This is the first cell in a row or column. So from C6, then we've got a colon to C16. So that's the end. So because they all have the letter C, it's C6 to C16, that's all in column C, and it's rows 6 through 16. So these are the range of cells that we're going to add together. Now, you don't need to necessarily type them like this. After you type this first parenthesis, sum parenthesis, then you can just click and drag over the cells that you want in order to get it to fill that in. We end with another parenthesis, and then we go ahead and hit enter, and we will get the sum or the total of the values of the cells that we've selected. All right, I'm going to click below that column of data, and to make a formula, we're going to start by typing in the equals, which is right up by your delete key. Now, the fancy math word for the total, or adding everything up, is a sum. That's the answer to addition problem. So I type the word S-U-M. Now, to sum something up, I'm going to now use an open parentheses. That's Shift 9. And I could click on individual values, like this one and this one. But see, as I click, it just keeps replacing the last one. So instead of doing that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the top one and drag down. And now we see the names of some cells appear in this formula. C2, that's the top one, and C8. In between is a colon, and that basically means it starts at C2 and it goes through C8, and you can see them highlighted up there. If we hit Shift and close the parentheses, then we hit enter, dun 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 dun, it added things for us. Wasn't that spectacular? So that was a great way to find the sum of that data. We could go ahead again and repeat this. So I'm going to show you equals, sum, S-U-M, open parentheses, click the first one, drag it down, close our parentheses, hit enter. And there we see the next sum. But guess what? Sheets is much smarter than that. It wants to save us some time. It recognizes that we might want to do this same formula like all the way across to find all of these sums. So when I have this clicked, I see that there's a blue square in the bottom corner, and if I put my mouse cursor over it, my mouse cursor turns into crosshairs. I'm going to now click and drag that right across. Boom. It did that formula all the way across, and it was smart. Now this column, the last one, is saying L2 to L8, which is the last column. It changed the formula in an intelligent way, so now we have the sum of each of those. Well, that's great. So sums is an important tool that we can definitely use. Another tool that might be very helpful is an average. Now, the math teacher in me wants to call this the mean, but that's not the name of the formula. It is average. We type the full word average out here, and this will find the average of the cells that we select. Again, we start with equals. We type the word average. We put a parenthesis, and then we can select the row or column that we want. This time, see how they both have a 7 there? That means they didn't change the row, but it went from C to H, so they changed the column. And so again, we would have just dragged this over an entire row, and we can find the average of that data set. If after hitting enter, it doesn't give you the average, it just literally says this formula, probably you didn't type your equal sign. That's the number one thing I see students do. If it just literally says average of, and it didn't change to pretty colors like this, then you probably are missing your equal sign. So go back and check to make sure that's there. So let's say we see that this row of data has been changing, and it's really the same type of data. It started at 650,000, ended at 615,000. What's the average here? Well, again, we can use a formula. We type equals. Average is a nice formula here. It's the word average. And then we type a parenthesis. And now we can drag this row. Once we have that whole row dragged, we can see that's C2 to L2. We close our parentheses and we hit enter. Not only did it find us the average number has been 633,587. This time, Sheets even did better than making us drag the formula down. It said, we have a suggestion for you. Would you like us to do this formula all the way down? Well, we can click this checkbox, and there it's done it for us. The average of every row all the way across. Since we have some information here that's new and it doesn't really have a heading, I'm going to give it a heading here. I'm going to call this the average. And this one over here, I'm going to call this the total. But you know what? Those headings don't have that same nice format that I did before. I could go ahead and do all the format changes on this, or I'm going to go to a cell that has the format I want. So this one, the way number is formatted here, I'm going to go over here, and there's this little, it looks like a paint roller, and it says paint format. What that means is we're going to take the format, the colors and the centering and all that fun stuff. If we click it, and now we click somewhere else, it makes this have the same format as that. So up here, I'll click on the 2019, click on the paint format tool, click right there. Great. Well, this row here, I'd like it to kind of go in that green, white pattern. Well, look, I'm going to take this columns format, click on the paint format tool, then highlight this. Oh, look at that. Beautiful. Now our data is really looking sharp. Okay. So we have taken a total and we have taken an average. The average data for some of these is definitely interesting. But let's go ahead and let's see, maybe we'd like to see a graph of this data. All right, so I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to select a whole set of data. I'm going to select 2010 and the 650, these two rows all the way out to 2019. So I've got those selected. If I go to Insert and I go down to Chart, I click Chart. Dun, 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 working very slowly. It inserted a chart for us. So look, it showed us that in 2010, the population was up here at 600,000, and it has gone down over time. It made a quick graph for us. Now, it also opened this whole other set of data over here where we could customize some things. It shows a line chart for us, which was a very good suggestion. Could we have changed this to a column chart? Yeah, that's fine. We can see now the data shows these bars going down. That's a reasonable thing to have done. A pie chart, though, yeah, that's not nearly as helpful. So it was a much better choice than this one. Geez. All right, coming back here. All right, I'm going to click on it again. I accidentally clicked away, and I lost my options here. So I'm going to click Edit Chart from this snowman thing up here, and I'm going to go back up to Line Chart. Yeah, that's probably the nicest. So we can see the non-Hispanic American Indian and Alaska Natives going down. All right, I'm actually going to say, you know what would be better than having just this data is having all of the data here together on my chart. I'm going to delete this. I have it selected. Delete. Gone. This data type column really isn't telling me that much anymore in general. So I want to delete it, but I actually don't want to delete my total here. I'm going to click on total. If I go to the edge, I get a hand, and I can drag that over there. Now I'm going to click this, delete this column. All right. Let's try a new thing. Let's now grab the headings over here. Grab the whole headings. Let's now go to Insert, Chart. Wow, now our chart also knows how to label these pieces of information. Now, you can see kind of at the bottom, some of the lines are they're so low that it's a little bit tricky for them to make a good graph down there. But we can expand it a little bit to make it a little bit bigger. But we made a line graph of all of those races. Now, I will see that it called this race down here, and that's not really what the category is there. This is really year, so I can click that and change that to year. The labels are some of the races here. I also don't like this heading. I mean, that's just too much. This could be U.S. children population races over time, meaning across some years. I guess I should capitalize over. There we go. So now we have a line graph of all of that data. Terrific. So now we can really look at this data more. We can understand which populations have been going up and down fairly quickly. We can see that the Hispanic or Latino group has been going up. We can see that the non-Hispanic white alone group has been going down. This yellow is non-Hispanic black alone. That's actually been going down a little bit as well. Very slightly, not near as much as the white alone group was. So we organized our data to make it more readable. We found totals, we found averages, and we made a graph of our data. Thanks so much for joining me. See you next time.